After a house move and an unfortunate data loss, the new Gamers Garden is here with a look at one of my favourite development studios. Now, the name Sonic Team on the Mega Drive was inconsistently used by Sega from the development of Sonic the Hedgehog right up to the release of Sonic & Knuckles. After the first game, the original team of developers separated between Japan and the US to continue the series in quick-fire succession over the next 3 years. But with the late 1994 release of Sega Saturn in Japan, the Sonic Team name was fully resurrected by Sonic's original programmer Yuji Naka and given to his newly formed R&D department after his return from Sega Technical Institute in America. Although failing to enjoy the level of international success Sega had wanted, largely due to the difficulty in creating 3D graphics on the Saturn when compared to Sony's PlayStation, it did showcase games by talented first-party developers from early in its life, with Virtua Fighter from AM2 and Panzer Dragoon from Team Andromeda setting a benchmark. But every committed Sega fan and many onlookers were eagerly anticipating what was coming from Sonic Team. Now, it's no secret, but it has to be stated right now, Sonic Team did not develop a full 3D Sonic sequel on the Saturn, and attempts to do so fell apart for reasons that I'll explain in another video. But they did work on an interesting handful of artistically and technically impressive games during the system's short lifespan, and it's these games we'll look at in this video on Sonic Team, Gamers Garden's first developer profile. Arriving in 1996, about a year and a half after the system launch, Sonic Team's premier Sega Saturn game is also their most famous, Nights into Dreams. Naotaro Oshima, the creator of Sonic himself, directed the game, and it was Sonic Team's first title without their namesake character. But Nights was positioned as Sega's leading home game for the Saturn, pitching it directly against the competing 3D platformers of Super Mario 64 from Nintendo and the likes of Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation. Now, this was likely a mistake by Sega because Nights is clearly nothing like other 3D platformers to this day. It's a game about flight, with Nights, the title character, locked into a 2D plane of movement, with the ability to fly freely in whichever direction you want along 2D planes that wrap around a range of 3D environments. And where Sonic was made to appeal mainly to the US market, Nights was aimed more towards Japanese and European audiences, with much of the aesthetic influence taken from Sonic Team's interest in Cirque du Soleil, very clearly seen in Nights himself and in the protagonists Claris and Elliot. This all makes for a fantastic but very esoteric game, and it's hardly surprising that although successful for Sega, Nights into Dreams would not go on to become as hugely successful as either Mario or Crash. Nights still stands as a glorious technical showpiece for the Saturn, although producer Yuji Naka had originally envisioned a game involving advanced hand-drawn 2D sprites and backgrounds. Naka instead chose to discard the graphics libraries Sega provided with Saturn development kits and created his own powerful 3D engine. This engine would be used again, as we'll see later in the video, and even led in part to the downfall in the development of the 3D Sonic sequel being developed by Sega Technical Institute. The Sonic Team engine was successful in giving some much needed reassurance to gamers and critics that the Saturn could indeed create fluid and captivating 3D graphics at a time when PlayStation was showing its advantage in this area. Nights runs at a fairly solid 25 to 30 frames per second depending on your region, and the screen is filled with colour and detail, mixing large 3D environments, a huge 2D backdrop and numerous 2D sprites to help fill the game world with life. Sonic Team even included a widescreen mode, something very rare in games of this time. Part of this world building is in the Nighttopians, the friendly residents of the stages, and their A-Life system. The artificial life system tracks the mood of the Nighttopians, and depending on your player actions, changes the character of the stage's music track. This tech was recycled for Sonic Adventure, and further shows Sonic Team's focus in creating a highly ambitious and esoteric game. They also developed the Saturn's 3D control pad during game testing, as the standard Saturn pad was not responsive in the way they wanted to Nights' flying movements. This feels fantastic when playing the game, as you really engage with the sensation of 360-degree movement when flying. This all hinges on excellent animations of the main character Nights, and the whole game comes together in a hugely satisfying and responsive way that effectively connects you to the character. As a game based around high scores, improving your skill level and completing as many laps of a course as you can instead of progression and exploration through large game worlds, Nights perhaps feels closer to Sonic the Hedgehog than gamers had expected. It does feel out of touch though when compared to the flagship Super Mario 64, which was setting the new trend in console video games. Nights was still a stunning first Saturn game for Sonic Team, and remains one of Sega's most beloved games ever by the hardcore fanbase. When development was complete, Naka himself stated that more could be done with the Saturn hardware, and we would see these results 2 years later, right near the end of the Saturn's life. But first, we have a few more games to look at. Although not any kind of sequel or even a full game, Christmas Nights was the next Sonic Team release for the Saturn around the end of '96. The game was a kind of Christmas gift / demo of Nights into Dreams from Sega, given out in Japan to subscribers of Famitsu magazine, in the US with Next Generation and Game Player magazines, and in Europe with Sega Saturn magazine. Christmas Nights contains just one level from Nights into Dreams, Spring Valley. Again supports the 3D pad, and you can choose either Claris or Elliot. Although it doesn't change the game much, seeing as you spend the majority of your time controlling Nights. The whole point of Christmas Nights is that the game changes in time with the internal clock on the Saturn, so playing at different times in the year affects the game in mostly small ways. But play the game around Christmas, or just change the date on your Saturn's internal clock, and Spring Valley gets a complete winter makeover. This is pretty much just a visual and sound change. The gameplay is basically the same, but it's a great idea for a free gift that advertises the main game without giving too much away, and even has its own exclusive content. Christmas Nights includes many unlockables that I didn't have time to explore when capturing gameplay for this video, but a notable piece of extra content is Sonic's first true appearance in 3D on the Saturn as one of the last unlockables. Once Christmas Night was completed, Sonic Team would begin development on their next full game, but we still have a few other games to look at first. Sonic 3D was mainly created by British developers Traveller's Tales, intended to be a last big first-party Sega game for the Mega Drive in '97. Sonic Team wrote the main design document and oversaw creative decisions, while Traveller's Tales did the actual programming, and this led to a very technically impressive isometric Sonic game using lots of pre-rendered graphics at the end of the Mega Drive's life, even if it didn't bring Sonic gameplay into the third dimension as successfully. With the impending failure of Sega Technical Institute's Sonic Extreme project, Traveller's Tales were commissioned to rush production of a Sega Saturn version of Sonic 3D as a safety net to ensure a mainline Sonic title was coming to the system in '97. This port was completed in just 2 months, and as you would expect, does not take full advantage of the Saturn hardware, instead being a mild step up from the Mega Drive original. Sonic 3D on the Saturn is the source code of the Mega Drive game, with new code over the top to improve the graphics and sound, along with a new 3D bonus stage. Most of the pre-rendered graphics have been improved, but the step up is not vast, although the new CD soundtrack is excellent. Composed by Richard Jacques of Sega Europe, who would go on to compose for other big releases like Jet Set Radio on the Dreamcast. Sonic 3D's gameplay is more exploration focused than pure speed, but it does feel rather monotonous quite quickly when compared to the previous Sonic games on the Mega Drive. Although it sold well enough, Sonic 3D was not the hit that Sega would have liked on the Mega Drive, and even less so on the Saturn. But Traveller's Tales proved they could be trusted with the Sonic license, and when Sonic Extreme was finally cancelled, they were given another chance to develop a Sonic game, and this time with the Saturn as the host platform. Before we get onto that game though, Sonic Team had lined up something else to keep the Sonic brand alive on the Saturn. Alongside Sonic Team's new top-tier game that was still nearly a year away, they had been developing Sonic Jam since the completion of Nights. This compilation was released in mid-97 as part of Sega's Project Sonic, a promotional strategy that was supposed to help raise awareness and brand recognition, certainly more necessary now that Sega's flagship console would be missing out on a big main series game from their company mascot. A compilation was chosen after Naka and Oshima received letters from younger fans asking more about Sonic's background and history, and so Sonic Jam would contain all 4 of the mainline Sonic games from the Mega Drive on one disc. Fully ported and with no emulation, these games are running natively with a wide range of bonus features and content. Sonic Jam has an original, normal and easy mode for each of the 4 games. The lock-on from Sonic & Knuckles works as expected, and the spin dash has even been programmed into Sonic 1. a move that was not given to Sonic until the first sequel. A fantastic bonus for PAL region gamers was that each game has been fully PAL optimized, so the game speed is increased over the Mega Drive games. It's a great way to brush up the games, but apart from that, Sonic Jam is Sonic as you would know it, and perhaps releasing so soon after the original games didn't do much to raise excitement for this compilation. Sega didn't do what Nintendo had done with Super Mario All-Stars in '93, upgrading 4 NES games with SNES style graphics and audio, but it might not have made much difference anyway, and would have been a huge and likely expensive project for a console already severely struggling and a development team already working on another top tier game. What Sonic Jam does have is a wealth of interesting extra content like a music player, character art, concept artwork, TV commercials and digitized manuals from different regions. This is accessed in the Sonic World, the 3D stage that works like an interactive archive for the extra content. This was of course pushed heavily as a selling point for the game, and I remember seeing lots of screenshots from this tiny 3D world in magazines, which gave the impression that we might actually be getting a full 3D Sonic game, but that simply was not the case. Sonic World is just a demonstration, as much for Sonic Team as for gamers, and to be fair, praise has to be given to Sonic Team for how good this looks. Again, running on the Knights engine, you can imagine that with enough time and resources, this could have been built into a full game, but that was never the point for Sonic Team, and Naka has since stated that Sonic World was just a testbed for what would later become Sonic Adventure, Sonic's first true 3D mainline game that came with the Dreamcast's launch in the West. Although a fantastic archive of the 4 mainline Sonic games from the Mega Drive, this collection is clearly missing Sonic CD from the Sega Mega CD, and this was picked up by critics at the time as a real disappointment. It does seem obvious that Sonic CD should be here, but there must have been some reason why not, and perhaps due to disk space. Now Sonic Team's next game was deep into development by this point, but Traveller's Tales were about to release the next part in Project Sonic. Late '97 saw Sonic R arrive on the Saturn, the second and final time Traveller's Tales would develop for the system. With largely the same team of developers, again Sonic Team would set out the design and oversee production, with Traveller's Tales doing the actual hard work. They had initially been working on a Formula 1 game for the Saturn, with an impressive game engine mostly complete and assets already produced, but when Sonic Extreme fell through, Sega came calling for a tentpole Sonic release for Christmas '97, and Sonic R was born. Although perhaps appearing like a Sega version of Mario Kart at first, Sonic R has far more in common with core Sonic 2D gameplay than it appears at first. It is a racing game, with 10 characters, 5 unlockable from the start, 5 tracks, 1 locked from the start, and with a single race, time trial and 2-player modes. It looks pretty slim at first, especially when you compare it to something like Mario Kart 64, but Sonic R shines in both its standout graphics for the Saturn and a great example of a 3D Sonic game in its own right. First of all, to see and do everything Sonic R has to offer, you don't just need to win the races. Each track feels more like a traditional Sonic level, with a variety of routes and hidden areas perfectly illustrated by each minimap. In each track you also have rings, tokens and Chaos Emeralds to collect, so exploration is key to learning the tracks, finding the best routes through them and collecting everything in order to unlock extra characters as well as the 5th track. The controls certainly feel tricky at first, but learning the gameplay and using the 3D pad gets you over this steep entry point, and you're left with a great Sonic game that pushes the core gameplay of the Mega Drive entries in a genuinely interesting direction. Sonic R also exhibits fantastic presentation throughout, with Traveller's Tales capturing the style of the Mega Drive games perfectly and bringing them into the 3rd dimension with some of the very best 3D graphics on the system. Sonic Team drew the tracks out on paper for Traveller's Tales to create the 3D models from, and the game used a very clever game engine to create transparency effects that were thought impossible on the Saturn. And for more information on this, check out the Game Hut YouTube channel, where one of the developers actually talks about how this incredible effect was made. This is backed up by an excellent soundtrack, again by Richard Jack, that completes Sonic R's overall high level of production value. Although Sonic R was high profile for the Saturn and technically very impressive, it arrived far too late in the console's life to make any difference, and the Saturn's fate was sealed already. I find it ironic that after so many poorly received and technically frustrating 3D mainline Sonic games since the Dreamcast, a perfectly viable template for an old school feeling yet 3D Sonic game had already been made, and it's such a shame that we didn't get a full-blown Dreamcast sequel that could have built on the strengths of the original. By now the Saturn was on its absolute last legs in the US and in Europe, and one of the system's final hurrahs would be the next big Sonic Team release. The Saturn received its final batch of games in the West in '98, but even with very small releases, they were some of the strongest and most technically accomplished games the system had seen, including Sonic Team's heroic action game Burning Rangers, a title intended to be another flagship release that would arrive far too late to help the Saturn's fortunes. For Sonic Team's last game on the Saturn, they started like they began, with another entirely new idea: Naka as producer and Ashima as director, an improved Knights engine, and a smaller dev team, about 2/3 the size of the full Sonic team. The result of nearly 2 years' hard work was Burning Rangers, a third-person action game about futuristic firefighters that pushed the Saturn's 3D capabilities to the absolute limit, and probably a bit past it. Naka and Oshima wanted to make a game that steered away from the growing trends of violence and death in video games, instead rewarding the player for heroic actions and saving lives. Firefighters were chosen as they were easy to identify bravery and heroism with, and the locations of damaged buildings and the constant danger of fire provided a fantastic canvas for the exploration and teamwork that would weave into the gameplay. Across 4 large stages, you choose a ranger and navigate through a variety of futuristic environments, putting out fires, collecting crystals and saving as many survivors as you can find, dealing with environmental hazards and the occasional rogue robot on your way. Gameplay now takes place in interior 3D environments with a full range of character movement, leaving behind the open-air 2.5D style of Knights. The game's aesthetic is very different as well, rejecting the bright and colourful circus atmosphere of Knights' dream worlds and putting the Rangers in dark, industrial and futuristic environments. In many ways, this is a direct Sega interpretation of the kinds of 3D games that were making the PlayStation and N64 so popular and had not been represented as well on the Saturn. But Sonic Team were also pushing the Saturn's 3D capabilities, making it do things that gamers simply hadn't known were possible with the aging hardware. With an extensive use of dynamic lighting effects and transparencies once thought impossible on the Saturn, Burning Rangers really stood apart from its contemporaries on every console. Fluid movement and flight are still strong gameplay elements here, as the Rangers can move around and dodge at speed thanks to their jetpacks. And this is conveyed with some really fantastic character animations that would be impressive on any system at the time. Not only did Sonic Team push the 3D graphics in Burning Rangers, but the game's audio plays a very strong part in the gameplay experience too. Identifying the audio cues before a fire breaks out are crucial for survival, and the limited use of in-game music allows the player to focus on this. It also means that the fully voiced Burning Rangers team can be heard at all times, with your team leader providing navigation throughout rather than using a minimap system, and it gels together perfectly to create the immersive illusion of teamwork, even though just the player character is on screen the vast majority of the time. Of course, the 3D pad first released with Knights is supported again, and it works fantastically and further demonstrates Sonic Team's focus on fluid and immersive character control. But as you can clearly see, the production values are not as smoothly executed as Knights however, and for all the innovation and clever graphical tricks that the upgraded Knights engine could provide, Burning Rangers was plagued by a lower and less consistent frame rate, poor collision detection and a huge amount of glitching in the environments. Burning Rangers relies far more on the pure 3D power of the Saturn, and Sonic Team had admirably pushed the system as far as they could, but it was simply too far. Overall, because of its rougher execution and very late release, Burning Rangers is not as fondly remembered now as Knights is, but it's arguably a more ambitious game that proved how Sonic Team were capable of truly pushing hardware as well as any of Sega's top teams. And it stands as another great example of the studio's creativity and flair during this time period away from the mainline Sonic series. So there we are. Across roughly 4 years, Sonic Team produced 2 full flagship Saturn games based on completely new ideas and with the highest level of Saturn production value. A Sonic compilation to keep their namesake character somewhere near the spotlight, and worked with the talented British studio Traveller's Tales to help fill the gap with some interesting takes on the Sonic formula when the true mainline Sonic title was cancelled after a disastrous development. Sonic Team would achieve what most consider to be the absolute height of their own fame with Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast, the true successor to the Mega Drive series. But their time on the Saturn was filled with unique and original games and experiments that served as a welcome break from the constant cycle of Sonic sequels, and it allowed the team to learn 3D game development away from such a high profile as Sonic. And in doing so, they created some of the most interesting and unique Sega games of all time. Thank you for watching this episode, and if you enjoyed it, please consider liking or subscribing. This video is going to be the first in a series about specific developers, and if you have any that you'd like me to have a look at, leave it in the comments. So until the next time, happy gaming.